Now, I do believe in reason. That fine thread of logic that winds its way through the chaos of the world like a trail of breadcrumbs in a particularly ornery forest. I've built my life on that thread, followed it into many a dark wood, and emerged more often than not with the beast cornered and the truth in hand. But lately, I confess, I am troubled. See, there's a rhythm I cannot ignore, a beat, not of drums, no sir, but of recurrence, like a figure hidden in the background of every photograph, a door that won't stay locked, no matter how many times you turn the key, or a name in a ledger that really ought not be there. Now, a younger man might dismiss such things as mere coincidence, the static of the universe too large to measure cleanly. But I have seen enough to know when the world starts looking back. Now, I must preface what you're about to hear with a confession. Not of guilt, no, but of ignorance. You see, this recording was not made by me. In fact, I do not know who made it, nor precisely how it came to be in my possession. It arrived 2 nights ago in a box that looked older than its interior, stitched up with twine and sealed with wax the color of old bruises. No return address, no explanation, just a note affixed to the inside lid, yellowed and dry as ash, bearing only the letters N.M. Now, I am a curious man, and curiosity, as they say, is a hell of a drug. I have not yet listened to the tape. What you and I are about to hear, well now, we'll be hearing it together for the very first time. And if it turns out to be a prank, or a poem, or the ravings of some poor soul lost to shadow, well, I reckon we can count ourselves lucky. But I do advise, should you choose to proceed, keep your eyes in the corners of the room. Sometimes the act of listening is more than enough to invite attention. Now let's begin.
Hello, rollers, and welcome to another episode of Alarian Archives, the podcast that exists because sometimes there's lore stuff that Alex has worked very hard on, and we, as players, are like, well, that doesn't really relate to anything we're doing right now, though.
We might need to work on that tagline a little bit. It's a little wordy. Eventually, we're going to find out a way to make Alarian Archives like a Alarian Archive, and it'll be like a fun, like, quick little tag instead of an explanation of, like, so sometimes players don't pay attention to stuff, and I still want people to know about that stuff, because some of it I worked really hard on.
I will say a lot of the stuff we go into in Alarian Archives isn't stuff that we were paying no attention to. It's stuff we didn't encounter and would only have encountered if we did very specific things that we did not do.
That sounds like an excuse. Guy who's part of the problem.
I mean, yes, but I don't know. I've never been someone who 100% most of the video games I've played. I've never beaten the Elite Four in a Pokemon game and have owned a Pokemon game in almost every series since its inception.
Wait, like not any Pokemon game ever?
Never beaten the Elite Four. Not once.
Bruh.
I'm revealing deep truths here. And speaking of deep truths, there's a reason why we're releasing Alarian Archives this week and not a typical main campaign episode. We have currently one episode available to be released, and we're 2 weeks away from our next recording because scheduling for the past 2 months has been insane. I think Alon told me that he's been at his house in the past month and a half, 2 months. He's been at his house for a grand total of 4 days.
So, everybody who's listening, we also have the problems with scheduling issues. Even when you do it professionally, you will occasionally have moments where scheduling issues are a problem.
Scheduling as the BBEG, even podcasts can't get away from it. So we're releasing Alarian Archives this week. We're supposed to have a recording next week, and not next week after next. And we should, in theory, be able to keep up with the scheduled recordings going forward. But if you notice us like needing to miss a week or something like that, odds are good this is why. It's just been a real struggle to get everybody around the table together for any extended period of time.
Seriously, guys, thank you for being so patient with us while we get this all squared out.
Oh, 100%. We know that y'all are always lovely about this stuff, but we do like to offer some explanation anytime the release calendar gets wonky. So for today's Alarian Archives, I wanted to ask about something that has been puzzling me more than anything. This is not something, I know often we do audience questions, but in this case, I was like, I want to know more about this, but also Solinar does not want to know more about this. Solinar will probably never want to know more about this. In this side of Virion, with Alaria, Oceanvar, Talair, Boris Empire, why does it feel like I'm missing one?
Because the other side of Virion has 7 countries, and we've been going over them a lot.
That's true.
This side of Virion only has 4.
In preparation for campaign 2, we've been talking about the other side of Virion quite a bit.
Ask, once the cast reveal happens and everybody knows who's going to be on the show, ask them about my 4-hour lore PowerPoint presentation on the gods. There are like 2 other PowerPoint presentations I have prepared.
We heard that the one for nations was of a similar length, and we were like, yeah, let's break that out into 2 sessions. How about we do that? The thing I wanted to ask about, though, is how do the various nations prepare for war? We've gotten glimpses of it for both Alaria and the Boris Empire, and I think we're going to be exploring the Boris Empire's particular methods for this war a little bit more in detail in the show. But in general, it seems like mobilizing all of these people, especially using things like magic and giant flying drake creatures, like, it seems like it'd be incredibly complicated. So it feels like you've explored it some as part of world building. And so I wanted to explore it in here because I can just about guarantee that the instant a military strategist starts talking in a room that the party is in, the party at large will be trying to sneak out and do other stuff.
Yeah, that's probably a safe bet. So when you're asking specifically, what are you asking about how it's working currently with the tensions between Alarian and the Boris Empire, or are you asking in general per nation?
I think more generally, like per nation, what does preparing for war look like? Because I know Alaria, it's a kingdom, right? So the queen makes a statement to her knights. Her knights start rallying troops. There's, I presume, other military leaders. But basically, it's like the fingers of the queen go out to the distant corners of the kingdom and determine like how people are getting rallied and to where.
So if we're going to start with Alaria generally, and the Boris Empire to a certain extent is also very similar with this. I mean, I think we've talked about this before in other Alarian archives, but the Boris Empire and Alaria were once one country. Like, aeons and aeons and aeons ago, they were one country. And then there was a schism. And that is why there's so many similarities to each other. Like why they both have a set of knights that are one for one identical. And also why there is millennia of animosity between the two of them.
I don't know that I actually realized that.
Yeah, we went, I think I said it, or I might have just assumed that because I knew it, everyone knew it, because I will sometimes have that problem. It's not my greatest trait. But yes, no, the Boris Empire and Alaria used to be one nation, and that's why they have some similarities. Because you'll notice Ocean Var and Talair are both non-monarchical societies. Both of them are multi-representative societies. Talair is a republic, and Ocean Var is a collection of tribes that meet at the summit of the Ocean Var Games and things like that. The only actual monarchies are the Boris Empire and Alaria, and that there have been changes over time. One of the biggest divisions that actually happened with their split was the Boris Empire has their ruler passed down genetically, whereas in Alaria, that's actually less important. What ends up actually happening with Alaria is if there is no heir apparent, the queen or king announces their successor, who is a chosen person that then takes the throne after they pass or retire.
So what you're saying is King Boat is not entirely off the table.
I cannot emphasize enough how Queen Elise would never, ever pick Boat. King Johannes is much more likely than King Boat.
Okay. Actually, I can see it. I'm on board.
I will say that in the current situation, though the war has kind of set it aside, Queen Elise does have two candidates that she is deciding between. And by the end of campaign 1, by the beginning of campaign 2, the new ruler will be sitting on the throne because Queen Elise will step down and become essentially a queen regent. And she will act as an authority and a vizier kind of representative to the new ruler. But you can retire as a monarch in Alaria.
That's really cool.
And it's still a monarchy because the people as a general rule don't actually have any say in who the monarch nominates. But they basically are like, all right, you're my guy. Here you go.
This is tangential to what I had asked, but since we're on this topic anyway, what happens if the queen were to pass away without naming an heir?
They are required, basically immediately upon their coronation, to write not a will is an incorrect word, but I don't have a better comparison. On their coronation, they are to write a sealed letter in the event of their death. Because there was actually we can get into the millennia ago, but the thing that caused the schism between the Boris Empire and Alaria was actually an argument because of that. There was an argument because the ruler had not named a successor, and there were two heir apparents, and they went to war. That is actually why the Boris Empire is so focused on genetic line, and why the Boris Emperor has multiple wives. It is to generally assure that the bloodline continues.
Man, I know we're not there yet, but I'm really excited for the potential future as part of the Crown heist the wedding of the Boris Emperor and Boat Mary?
I don't think that the Emperor deserves that.
Aw.
Take that as you will. Either he's not good enough or he hasn't done enough to earn that punishment. Whichever direction you take it is the one I meant it.
So getting
Sorry,
back...
I know that was very tangential, but I had been positive that I had mentioned it, which I may not have. Again, that's entirely possible. But it does color some of the conflict that happens, because both of them mobilized for war in somewhat similar ways, in that the Queen's knights are also her generals, and the same is true for the Emperor. Their knights generally have their own soldiers beneath them that are specific. Oh my God, I was wondering why you were making that face. Any of you listeners who haven't met Josh in person, anyone who's met him in person knows this, but he has a very specific face that he makes when he's waiting for you to stop talking so he can say the stupid joke that he thought of while you were saying something. And it's both very polite and a little bit terrifying because it's a very specific expression. There's literally a reaction image that we have on the Goblins and Growlers Discord. I think, is it on the Goblins and Growlers Discord, or I just have it saved so I use it?
No, we have it on a friend's Discord because I made the face right before drinking some ranch nog. But what we do have on the Goblins and Growlers Discord is Pun Husky, which is basically the same expression, just it's a husky making it instead of me. Josh
is just Pun Husky, but a person.
Yeah.
Person Husky. You're a bad superhero. But ultimately, what generally happens is each of the knights has soldiers beneath them that are specialized in something. So, like, Lady Alice of the Boris Empire, the one that everybody was making the Witch King of Angmar jokes about, she leads all of the Boris Empire's Wyvern Riders. That is who she oversees. She is considered among them the best, but she oversees the entire division of the military that are Wyvern Rider specialists. Now, the general infantry are going to be overseen by people who work in the palace more than they are going to be the knights individually. But the knights individually, like Tegan, he's going to oversee the battle mages that they have. Like, they have a whole division of war mages, and he is the one who oversees them. It's actually part of why the Boris Empire has become so dangerous, because previously the battle mages were glass cannons, essentially. But he has instilled a martial element to their training that has made them a lot more dangerous.
Oh, Tegan is the ex.
Yeah, he's Lilla's ex.
Okay.
Lilla and Tegan went to magic school together in Marine. And I had so many plotline stuff like connected to that for you guys to like do stuff with, but it never really felt like a good time to interject any of it. So I just sort of put in the like random rant of Lilla's as both a in-character thing that she would do, but also kind of an Easter egg to be like, hey, here's the thing that happened. There were a lot of plot lines of like the different interactions between the Alarian knights, and by extension, another whole thing of the interactions between the Barosian knights that just never really made sense to cram into the already very dense narrative. But there was like a whole thing, because remember, I wrote both sets of knights to be an Otome.
Right. I'm really looking forward to, once the show gets big enough for us to finance your spin-off Otome game for
Doki Doki Alarian Knights.
That then merits a sequel, which is the Barosian Knights.
You were supposed to be able to play as Saya. That's why she's there. She was supposed to be the protagonist of the Otome, so I'm like, she should exist. Also, I am aware that listeners are back and forth right now on if this is a bit. It is 1000% not a bit. This is 100% true. I want to write a stupid Virian Otome so badly.
Alex confirmed. Not a bit.
So going back, so the mobilization of the military is very focused on these knights and the platoon, like the platoons underneath them specifically. And then under those groups is the general infantry and navy and all that. The mobilization of the military is very, very focused on the movements of the knights because they are able to act with general, not impunity is the incorrect word, but they are able to act freely. They are able to make their own decisions. So if they never got word from the crown that they can engage if they see an Alarian fleet, if one of the Barosian knights is on board and goes, no, bomb them all to hell, if the crown has an issue, the crown can say something, but generally becoming one of those elite knights means that you have the full confidence of the crown and are able to act with the will of the empire. And Alaria's the exact same way. Truthfully, with only a couple of minor exceptions, everything that happens in Alaria's general structure will also happen in the Boros Empire and vice versa. The only difference is the Boros Empire's use of taking prisoners and using them as slaves to fight, which has a lot to do with their dwindling population that they do this. Now, I want to be very, very clear. That is not a justification. But that is why they are so focused on that. Because it's been hard for the Boros Empire for a while now. And famine and plague are a big problem there.
I could see that. So if Alaria and Boris both are basically like your monarchical figure makes a decision about how things are going to go down, and then your knights are kind of your generals, but also your team leads for your specialized units. What is it like in Talair? Because they've got the Council of 13. Does the council, like, do they have to make a vote about whether to even, like, militarize?
Yes. Which is part of the reason why Talair is almost always neutral in conflicts. Talair was neutral during the Dragon War. The one that ended with the sealing of the metallic dragons. Talair was completely neutral with everybody. They did not choose any kind of sides. They abstained completely. The way that the military works in Talair is a little bit different because being in the military in Talair is far more of a standard job than it is in most other places. Like there's being in the military is a career, it is a job, but it is also like a very distinct, like you have a distinction between like somebody who has been in the military and a civilian. Like there's sort of a line there because there's such a different experience being somebody in the military. In Talair, almost all of the members of the military are sellswords, for lack of a better term, that are employed by the member of the Council of 13 to protect the individual region that member of the 13 represents.
Oh, so all of their military force works as guards most of the time.
Their guards and their military farce. Their guards and their military force are the same thing. They are all soldiers. And the way that it works for them all to be unified is if one member of the Council of 13 wants to go to war with Alaria for whatever reason, they only have their company of soldiers. They only have the ones that protect their region. And there's a member of the Council of 13 that could be a intimidating force, like if your region is Tinkerhaven. But if your region is like up closer to like Belfast, it's going to be smaller. There's a smaller population. There are fewer people. The military of Tulare is only actually intimidating when it is all unified, which is kind of why you need the Council of 13 to all be in agreement. Or at least have only one or two abstain or vote against it.
Right. Okay. So if Tulare was to mobilize a military force, it would be a lot slower. Because
infinitely so.
They'd have to come to some kind of agreement about what that looks like, and then they'd have to each respectively issue orders to their region's troops.
And pull them from whatever their position was at the time, yes.
Wow. Yeah, that would take a while.
The military in Tulare isn't formal the way that it is in the Boris Empire and Alaria. That is a better way to say what I was saying earlier, of like there's that distinction between like military and civilian. It's not formal. There absolutely are criteria one must meet and training one must have, but it's dependent on the member of the Council of 13 of your region. There could be someone who's rejected from service in one region and just moves on to another region that is more in need of that kind of, like, more in need of help, and it's a lower bar.
The fact that they got drunk on shift every time they were on shift is maybe less of an issue if you're up in Belfast where there's hardly anything to do in the first place.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to explain all of it.
Well, I imagine then that Ocean Var is kind of similar, right? Because each of the tribes is very individual. So whoever they have underneath them that would be fighters, that would be the sort of people who would be able to engage in significant combat, it would be up to the individual tribe leader, and then they would have to have sort of a meet, right?
Yes. If one of the leaders in Ocean Var wanted to go to war against the Boros Empire, they have the full capacity to mobilize their own tribe against the Boros Empire. Depending on the tribe, that could be more dangerous than others. Ocean Var during the Draconic War was split in half. Half of Ocean Var sided with the Chromatics, half of Ocean Var sided with the Metallics. You might remember that there was that fight with the Wyvern Rider in Ocean Var. Wyverns are native to the Boros Empire. Wyvern riding is an art that is exclusive to the Boros Empire. It only was brought over to those that sided with the Boros Empire during the Draconic War.
Oh, I thought that wyverns and wyvern riding was native to Ocean Var while we were there. Okay, that's very interesting. Now, what I do remember is that the wyvern rider we fought was named Stronk Hammerfist.
I think you were fighting Grun.
Oh my god, you're right. Wait. Yes, Stronk was just one of the other chiefs.
I used Stronk Hammerfist as one of the chiefs that appeared at the games because I thought I said that name accidentally when I was trying to say another name that I can't remember now, but it was one of those things where you say it, but it comes out of your mouth like mumbly and weird. And so instead of saying something like Striker or something, I said Stronk. And I was like, this is his name forever now. He's going in the notes as Stronk.
It's beautiful. I'm so glad that that's his name. I will say it sounds a little bit like you were trying to say a name and then you were having a Stronk, but like, you know, I still enjoy it a great deal, so I'm not going to complain. I think you're right. We did go up against Grun. Man, you gave him a last name and I'm not recalling it right now. But you called him Wyvern Rider Grun, is my recollection now.
That sounds correct, yes.
I just remember he thought that he'd be able to assassinate Maheni while she was out doing adventuring things. and was not anticipating Johannes climbing onto his wyvern.
I mean, in fairness,
clobbering the hell out of him.
In fairness, I don't know that would have been my first assumption of what would have happened either. So if Maheni wanted to send her people to help out Alaria during the war, because Maheni has the same kind of attunement to dragon sense that Alita does, and was able to predict the party showing up and sort of what they're doing and what the values. That's why Maheni was willing to talk to the party. If she wanted to send them aid, she could send her own people. She doesn't need anybody else's approval to do that. But if Oceanvar wants to be represented as Oceanvar in a military sense, like on the side of a war, they're going to have to do some agreeing that they don't normally do. It's kind of similar to, like, Entmoot. Like, if Treebird wanted to show up and start throwing rocks at Saruman, he could, but he really needs, like, everybody to show up and throw rocks for it to really make a difference. I could have used so many other descriptions, but for some reason, Entmoot was just what was in my head for that.
I mean, I think most people understand the idea of a group of tribe leaders coming together in a meeting to either agree or disagree about whether or not to become involved in global military conflict.
To be perfectly frank with you, on this side of Virion, the vast majority of military conflict is between Alarian and the Boris Empire.
And there's just a lot of Oceanvar and Talair being like, yeah, we're not really on one side or the other, like as continents. We're not really on one side or the other, except for the fact that we do provide weapons and, like, guys who know how to do things. And
if we're going with the Draconic War, which is the last major, this side of the world conflict that happened, Talair stays out of it because Talair wants to keep business going, because Talair is focused on its economy above anything else. Oceanvar gets split down the middle because everyone has very firm opinions on what is the right thing to do, and none of them will budge, and sometimes those opinions are the opposite. The Boris Empire and Alaria are just constantly throwing rocks at one another.
And that kind of makes sense. Like, if your neighbors are always whipping rocks at each other and you see how much damage that's causing to their individual nations, you yourself are less likely to want to get involved in conflict.
But all in all, that's generally a good summary of where everybody sits and how everybody would mobilize for war. It's not incredibly elegant because I myself don't have a whole lot of, like, military experience or knowledge. So I just read what made sense historically and applied it to what I thought made sense to the nations individually. I'm certain that there's 1,000 things that somebody far more intelligent and well-versed in this than I could be like, well, here are all the reasons that this doesn't make any sense. And I'd be like, you're probably absolutely correct. There are some things that I generally have a pretty good grasp on, like, no, this makes sense and is reasonable and, like, is generally how something could work. And then there's some times where I'm like, I am filling in the gaps with my best guesses. And I assure you, military strategy is a best guess situation.
We get off the docks and we find that the warships have been cruising along in 70-foot deep water.
You'll never let that go, will you?
All right. Well, thank you all so much, everybody, for joining us. We are planning to be back to a regular release episode next week. And ideally, we are back on schedule for a little while yet. We are in the final arc. So we're very eager to get to some of the, like, big reveals we've got planned. Some of the, like, more pressing plot elements and oriented things that are really challenging for the party to have to deal with. There's a lot of dominoes that are falling as we speak.
I'm very interested in seeing how we get everything wrapped up and how the story ends. It's a little bittersweet, I'll be real, but I am balming that pain with working on campaign 2 stuff. I'm excited. I'm interested in seeing where we go with all this.
Hell yeah. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you in chat. Bye.
Bye.